Hi there, and welcome to this episode where I just want to specifically talk about intra-African trade. Um, of course, the topic is centered on Pan-Africanism and its impact on global trade. It's going to be an interesting episode because I just want to touch base, on a couple of things, that has been going on in my head, and I hope you're going to learn one thing or the other from it. Like I have always said, I am, one person who just wants to see that Africans actually get to succeed in entrepreneurship as against the current thing that we have or the current structure or ideology that we have on the continent. So let's get into this episode and see what we can learn from it. So first things first, I just want to look at the whole concept of slave trade. Why was this slave trade in the first place? When you go back in time into history, you realize that one major reason for slave trade is to build manpower. And the whole of Europe, at the time, slave trade actually started on the continent of Africa, where, of course, Africans also enslaved themselves. I mean, don't get that wrong. But before the advent of major slaves, the Asian slave trade and all concepts of slave trade, that centered around Africa, the whole idea of slave trade really was, about building manpower. And when Africans saw that, as something that was derogatory or something that they never liked, and of course, I mean, the Europeans were like, okay, you know what? The good thing is that we can give you your freedom and in the way you want it. But the freedom also came or yeah came at a cost, because if you look at what has happened so far, we all advocated for an end to slave trade. I mean, that actually is one of the best things that can happen, even though of course so many people have been separated from family homes and lands and all that. Then you have the next type of slave trade, because we wanted education and academics, as it were. And if you look at the design of the school system also within Africa, it's more of producing more manpower. So the question that one will ask is that, is slavery really over? Um, there will be so many arguments. I mean, when it comes to the issue of if slavery has actually come to an end, because right now you're seeing a flurry of Africans living the continent and moving over for greener pastures. And basically it still goes back to the concept of slave trade, where it was all about manpower. I mean, Europe was being industrialized at the time that slavery was really having the foothold on the African continent. And right now you see modern type of looking for manpower to fit or to fix the area of people who will work in industries and in certain areas. And basically, for me, the whole concept of slave trade has not actually come to an end. Rather, it was just, will I say, reviewed or revised, into a better form, whereby you no longer have slaves, but you have people who are mentally enslaved. And so it's a different concept right now, which really has not really developed, the African continent. So that is still having a foothold on the continent of Africa, and I'm hoping that sometime in the future we can actually get to understand them. So recently I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about because she's a great person when it comes to writing codes, and she could actually literally build anything and with writing codes. And so we were talking, and I was trying to make her understand why she has to build something for our continent. And she was actually telling me of wanting to move to Europe or probably maybe any other country. And even though she is from a country which is Portuguese oriented, I mean, this is a lady with so much talent, and I could see the talent in her. And one concept you'll find across West Africa is the term japa. Japa syndrome means somebody living where they are to another country, specifically the West. And you will find that term being used among young people, and which goes back to the issue of slave trade I was just saying earlier, that the whole concept of slave trade never stopped. it is actually just reviewed or revised and into a better format. And when you look at our continent, one thing that we need to speak specifically about is that I think in one of my videos, was it this morning or one of those days, I was speaking about specifically if you look at China, as it were, they have, all of the social media that we, currently use in Africa, they have a replica of that built by them for them, not built, by elsewhere. But when you look at the concept of, a social media, as it were, which is where narratives are being controlled, you realize that for Africa, for about 1 point something billion people, which is almost, the population of what we have in China, we don't necessarily have our own social media, so we are dependent on Western social media. And what happens with that is narratives are actually controlled for Africans from elsewhere. And so it also becomes a problem because it now plays on our mental capacity, so we are mentally enslaved to the West. And if we are talking about Pan-Africanism and the impact it will have on global trade, the first thing is we need to deconstruct the mind. We need to understand things differently. Not now that our minds are actually being shaped, from elsewhere, and not until recently, whereby we have social media influencers. I mean, influence. I mean, when it comes to social media, was controlled by the West, and so there's a whole lot of work, to do with regards to the area of deconstructing, the mind, which is one area I feel that Africans actually have to start working on. And in one of my conversations, I actually it was speaking to a gathering, and I told them that we don't have, an African ideology. There is an importance, to have what we call, as African, ideology when it comes to deconstructing the mind and liberating ourselves, from mental slavery. So the next thing I really want to speak about is the issue of education. And if you look at China, for example, it has a different kind of education because when you are talking about liberating a people, you have to look at the type of education that holds sway in that area. All across Africa, the education that we have, I mean, the curricula, as it were, that we had was actually designed by the Europeans. And not only was it designed by the Europeans, we actually follow the European, design of curricula. So basically, you find Africans, we can speak very good English, we can speak very good Portuguese, we can speak very good French, we can create something out of nothing. But you realize that our academia or academics is specifically more tailored to being, people who will actually work in the office or work, within a department or work on something. And there was a time recently I actually questioned, I mean, how many research centers in Africa are actually doing or working on research that will better the continent? How many of them? And basically, that boils down to academia as well, with regards to people who are actually involved in academia. But like I was talking about earlier with social media, China has a different type of education. And the education is centered not only just based, classroom based, understanding of concepts or what have you, but it's also based upon the ability to create something out of nothing, the entrepreneurial style of academics, where people not only go to school to learn and pass and have good grades, but also to design and work on something different in terms of business, as it were. And which is why when you look at China, it has been and has continued to be the manufacturing hub of the world when it comes to anything. I mean, technology, fashion, whatever you can think of. And even people from the West will always go to China to actually mass produce anything that they want to produce. But guess what? The designs are actually coming from the West. So if you look at that concept of what China has been able to do, we also have manpower that have gone to school. We need to develop ideology and center our ideology on people who not only go to school and have good grades, but are able to actually innovate, invent, and of course become better innovators and create, something that will make, our continent, better for it. And then, of course, change the trajectory of what was actually planned even before now, for most of us. So the next thing I want to highlight is this. We have the power of the internet today, and the internet sets us free. It delivers or liberates us from any form of mental slavery, as it were. The only problem that we're having on the continent is our ideology needs to be reviewed, needs to be revised, and it all starts, with you as a person. Do you want? What do we feed on? When we look at social media, and so with the advent of the internet, it is much more easier for people to deconstruct the mind, and that is how Pan-Africanism, the unity of Africa, can bring about its major foothold on global trade. And one of the things I realized also with the internet is that sadly we go on the internet to begin to fight one another and then quarrel within one another and then begin to insult one another. We are more interested in ethnic related conversation. We're more more interested in conversations that are basically more of attacking one another, speaking about countries and all of that boundary that was drawn up by the Europeans for us. And so if we really want to break free and we really want to have a better Africa where we can trade with one another and have conversation with one another, the internet is actually a good place to start. When you have communication, it makes it easier for you to liberate anyone. And I think this is the time, that we can actually liberate one another. And this is the time we can actually just set each other free from the shackles of mental slavery, which has enslaved us. Because people can thrive, if people can be successful when they come together in unity to really decide what they want to do. And it starts also with the youth, because if you look at Africa, we have roughly about ages 18 to 35. You see that section, about 450 million people, and most of those people spend a good amount of time on social media, and we need to really bring that all home to really liberate ourselves, and of course be a good people or a better people, helping the continent to become better in terms of everything that we want to do. So if we bring everything home with regards to everything I'm saying, what am I really trying to drive at? You see, Pan-Africanism and its impact on global trade is happening indirectly, whether we like it or not. Most of the raw materials that you use for most goods, globally, is coming from the continent of Africa. And one thing that we need to realize as a people is that we are actually, really underpaid, being ripped off, left, right, and center. I mean, whether by manpower, probably maybe by physical, or probably maybe by even the raw materials that we supply. And if you're an African in the diaspora, if you're an African on the continent, it's something that is a major cause for concern. And I feel that with the power of the internet, with what is happening, we can really have a positive impact, on global trade. And it starts with the individual, right? It starts with the individual. I think patriotism also, in terms of being patriotic, to the motherland, to the continent, is very, very important. And that should be one of the number one things, I mean, that we have to also put at the back of our mind, or place at the back of our mind, rather. So there's so much that we can achieve as a people. There's so much we can, really, really get our hands on, as a people. And it's just important that we must realize that where we are currently is not where we should be. And so we should be able to fix, the education system. We should be able to fix also the issue of ideology. We should be able to fix the issue of how we approach, academia, as it were, from the entrepreneurial point of view. So just a little bit of me having a conversation, with everyone. I believe that maybe you have actually learned one thing or the other, I mean, from this conversation this morning. So I will just, you know, um, advise that you subscribe and follow, for more, conversation, because going into the future, I'll be having a proper conversation with regards to the whole Pan-Africanism, and of course, the impact it has also on global trade. But the idea is actually really to um, help to inspire a generation that is willing to, trade, a generation that's, fully inspired to do something in terms of bringing positivity out of nothing, also from the continent, a generation that is willing to actually industrialize, the continent of Africa. That is all the premise of, these conversations, will be. And so, just follow, like, and share, and of course, there'll be more conversation, going forward. So, but until I see you on the next one, for me, for this one, it's gonna be, have a good time wherever you find yourself as an African, and I believe Africa shall thrive and will thrive in the name of Jesus. Goodbye and have a good one.